Cole Merritt was not a man who talked much. He flew alone, ate alone, and preferred the quiet hum of his ship's engine over any conversation. His freight run through the outer rim was the same as always, long, empty, and peaceful. Just the way he liked it. His ship, the Dustwalker, was a mid-sized cargo freighter. Nothing fancy. The paint was scratched, the seats were worn, and the coffee machine in the kitchen made a sound like a dying animal every morning. But she flew well and she never let him down. That was enough for Cole. He was 3 days into a 7-day run when the sensor blinked. He almost ignored it. Heat sensors on old cargo ships threw false readings all the time. A loose wire, a warm crate, a ration pack left too close to a heating vent, it could be anything. He tapped the screen, waited, and watched the reading pulse again. 3 signatures. Grouped tightly together. Rear cargo hold, Bay 3. Cole leaned back in his pilot's seat and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he stood up, picked up his handheld scanner, and walked to the back of the ship. The corridor between the cockpit and the cargo bays was narrow and low-lit. Cole moved slowly, not because he was afraid, but because he had learned over the years that moving fast into unknown situations rarely ended well. He had found stowaways before. Twice, in fact. The first time it had been a young trader who had missed his connecting ship and panicked. The second time it had been 2 workers trying to escape a bad contract on a mining station. Both times Cole had handled it quietly without drama. He reached Bay 3 and pressed his hand against the door panel. The door slid open with a low grinding sound. He had been meaning to fix that for months, and he stepped inside. The hold was cold and dark. His scanner light swept across the rows of sealed supply crates stacked from floor to ceiling along both walls. For a moment he saw nothing unusual. Then he heard it. A small sound. Barely anything. Like something trying very hard not to breathe too loudly. Cole moved the light slowly toward the back corner, between the 2 largest crates on the left side of the hold. He stopped. 3 dragon sisters were huddled together on the cold metal floor. They were pressed tightly against each other, the eldest with her wings folded around the other 2 like a shield, her body curled to keep them warm. The middle sister was leaning against her with her eyes half open, too weak to hold her head up properly. The youngest was curled into a tight ball, almost completely still, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. They were in bad shape. Cole could see that immediately. Their scales, which he guessed should have had some kind of deep color and natural shine, were dull and dry and pale at the edges. Their bodies were thin, too thin, the kind of thin that comes from going without food for a long time. Their eyes were sunken. Their movements, even the small ones, were slow and heavy. The eldest saw him the moment his light reached her. Her eyes snapped open fully and she rose, slowly and painfully, placing herself between Cole and her sisters. She was shaking. Her legs were unsteady beneath her. But she held her position and she held his gaze, and even half-starved and exhausted there was something in her eyes that made it very clear she would not move easily. Cole stood still. He did not reach for anything. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her, then past her at the other 2 and took in what was in front of him. He had questions. A long list of them, actually. How long had they been on his ship? Where had they boarded? Where were they going? Where had they come from? Why were they alone? Where was the rest of their family? He asked none of them. He turned around and walked back toward the kitchen. It was a small kitchen. Barely more than a counter, a storage cabinet, and the suffering coffee machine. Cole opened the storage cabinet and pulled out 3 ration packs. The good ones, the full meals he kept for long runs, not the small emergency bars. He filled a large water container from the ship's main supply line. He went to the emergency cabinet in the side corridor and took out the thermal blanket folded at the bottom, the one rated for deep space temperature drops. He carried everything back to Bay 3. The eldest was still standing in the same spot, still watching the door. When Cole came back and she tensed immediately, her wings spreading slightly in a reflex that probably cost her more energy than she had to spare. Cole crossed the hold slowly, set everything down on the floor in front of her, and took 3 steps back. He sat down on a low crate near the door and put his scanner light face down so the glow was soft and indirect instead of harsh. Then he waited. The eldest did not move for a long moment. Her eyes went from Cole to the food and water on the floor, then back to Cole. He could see her thinking. He could see the struggle between suspicion and desperation playing out behind those tired eyes. Desperation won. She moved to the water first. She did not drink it herself. She turned and pressed the container carefully to the youngest sister's lips, tilting it gently until the small one stirred and swallowed. Then she gave it to the middle sister. Then last of all she drank herself. She opened the ration packs the same way, Youngest first, then the middle, then herself, taking only what was left after the other two had eaten. Cole noticed that. He did not say anything about it. When the first round of packs was gone, he stood up, went back to the kitchen and returned with 3 more. He set them down and sat back on the crate without a word. The middle sister was sitting up more steadily now. She watched Cole with sharp, cautious eyes, intelligent he thought. Very alert despite how weak she still was. The youngest had not moved much, but her breathing had evened out, which was the thing Cole had been watching most carefully. The eldest ate the second ration slowly, keeping one eye on her sisters and one eye on Cole. When she finished, she straightened up slightly and looked at him directly. He met her eyes. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The ship hummed around them. Somewhere in the distance the engine cycled through its regular low rhythm, steady and familiar. Cole reached over, picked up the thermal blanket and held it out toward her. She looked at it. Then at him. Then she reached out and took it. She spread it around her sisters without hesitation, tucking the edges in around the youngest with a care that was so quiet and natural that Cole looked away briefly, feeling like he was seeing something private. He stood up and walked back toward the door. Before he left, he reached over to the bay's wall panel and dimmed the hold lights down to the lowest setting, just enough to see by, soft enough to sleep in. He paused at the door. He did not turn around. He just said quietly and simply, "You're safe here. Sleep." Then he walked back to the cockpit. He sat down in the pilot's seat and looked at the route map on his screen. His delivery was scheduled to arrive in exactly 91 hours. If he held his current speed, he would make it with 6 hours to spare. His freight company had a penalty system for late deliveries, not a large penalty but a real one. Cole pulled up the route settings and extended his travel time by 14 hours, adjusting his speed down and adding a longer arc to his path. The penalty fee appeared on screen automatically. He looked at it for a moment. He closed the screen. He reached over to the suffering coffee machine, which groaned and shuddered and eventually produced something that was at least warm, poured it into his battered mug and stared out at the stars beyond the cockpit window. 3 sisters, half-starved, hiding in the cold. He did not know their story yet. He did not know where they had come from or what had happened to them or where they were trying to go. He did not know their names. He knew they had needed help. That had been enough to decide everything else. Cole drank his coffee in the quiet dark and let the dust walker carry them all forward through the stars. The first morning after Cole found them, he did not go to the cargo hold right away. He made breakfast first. Powdered eggs, heated flatbread, and a small tin of fruit from the back of the cabinet that he had been saving for no particular reason. He put it all on a tray with another full water container and carried it back to Bay 3 without making a sound. He knocked once before opening the door. He did not know exactly why he did that. It just felt like the right thing to do. The eldest, he did not know her name yet, was already awake. She was sitting upright with her wings folded neatly behind her, watching the door the moment it opened. The middle sister was awake too, sitting beside her. The youngest was still asleep under the thermal blanket, curled into a tight ball with only the top of her head visible. Cole set the tray down on the floor in front of them, nodded once and left. He did the same thing at midday. And again in the evening. Each time he knocked first. Each time he set the food down, gave them space and walked away. He did not linger. He did not stare. He asked nothing. On the second visit the middle sister was watching the tray before he even set it down. On the third visit the eldest met his eyes briefly and gave a small, almost invisible nod before he turned to leave. It was a tiny thing. Cole counted it as progress. By the morning of the second day something had shifted. Cole was in the narrow side corridor running a routine check on the water recycler when he heard a sound behind him. He turned around slowly. The youngest sister was standing at the end of the corridor watching him. She was small, smaller than the other two, with large eyes that seemed to take up most of her face. Her scales had a little more color in them now than when he had first found her, a faint warm tone coming back with each meal. She was standing very still the way young things do when they are curious but not yet sure if curiosity is safe. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the water recycler panel and kept working. A minute passed. Then he heard the lightest possible footsteps moving slowly up the corridor. He did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the panel and his hands on the tools. The youngest sister stopped just behind his left shoulder and looked at what he was doing. Cole held up the small pressure gauge in his hand so she could see it better, turning it slightly in the light. He heard a very quiet sound that might have been interest. He set the gauge down, picked up the next tool and kept working. She stayed there for the entire 20 minutes it took him to finish the check. She did not touch anything. She did not make much sound. She simply watched every single move he made with those wide, careful eyes, missing nothing. When Cole finished and stood up, he looked down at her. She looked up at him. He said, "Good help," completely seriously, and walked back toward the kitchen. He heard the small footsteps follow him all the way there. That afternoon Cole was sitting in the cargo hold doorway, not inside, just at the edge, giving them space while still being present, when the eldest sister spoke to him for the first time. Her voice was low and a little rough, like someone who had not used it much recently. She spoke the common galactic tongue slowly and carefully, choosing each word with effort. She said, "Why?" Cole looked at her. "Why what? Why do you feed us?" She paused. "You do not know us." Cole thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "You were hungry." She waited, clearly expecting more. He did not add anything. She studied him for a long time with that sharp, tired gaze. Then she looked away. But she did not close herself off again. Over the next few hours she began to talk. Not in a rush, not all at once. Slowly, carefully, like someone testing the weight of ice before stepping on it. A sentence here. A few words there. Pauses in between that Cole never tried to fill. Her name was Sarah. The middle sister was Nora. The youngest was Ren. They had come from a clan of about 40 families, elders, young ones, who had lived in a system 3 sectors away from Cole's current route. It had not been a rich system. It had not been a famous one. But it had been theirs, and they had been settled and safe there for a long time. Then the Kethri Dominion had come. Cole had heard the name before. Everyone who flew the Outer Rim had. The Dominion was a faction that had been expanding aggressively for the past few years, claiming systems they had no historical right to and removing whoever was already living in them. They did not negotiate. They arrived with ships and numbers and gave very short deadlines. Sarah's clan had refused to leave. Cole did not ask what happened after that. The way Sarah's voice went flat and quiet when she reached that part of the story told him enough. The clan had scattered. Some had gone deeper into the Outer Rim. Some had tried to reach allied systems further in. Sarah did not finish that sentence. She stopped, looked at her sisters, and moved on. The 3 of them had been separated from the main group during the chaos. They had run with what little they could carry, moving from system to system, avoiding Dominion patrol routes, eating whatever they could find. 4 weeks they had been surviving on almost nothing, hiding in cargo holds and maintenance bays of ships whose pilots never knew they were there. Until Cole's ship. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked only one question. "Where are you trying to go?" Sarah looked at him steadily. "Somewhere the Dominion is not." Cole nodded slowly. He did not say anything more about it. He stood up, went to the kitchen, and came back a few minutes later with 3 mugs of warm broth from his emergency supplies. He handed them out, sat back down at the doorway, and said nothing further. Nora accepted her mug and immediately wrapped both hands around it, closing her eyes briefly at the warmth. She had not spoken directly to Cole yet, but she had been watching him constantly with those sharp, intelligent eyes, and Cole had the strong feeling that she understood far more than she let on. Ren took her mug, sniffed it carefully, then looked at Cole with great seriousness and said her first word to him directly. "Hot." "Yes," Cole said. She nodded as if this was important information she was filing away, then drank. Cole looked down at his own mug to hide the fact that something in his expression had shifted. That evening Ren followed him to the cockpit. She stood at the entrance for a moment, looking at all the screens and controls and blinking lights with an expression of barely contained fascination. Cole gestured at the co-pilot seat. She climbed into it carefully, sat up very straight, and stared at the starfield through the wide front window with her eyes wide open. Cole let her sit there. He ran his usual evening system checks, explained nothing, and simply let her watch. After a long while she pointed at a bright cluster of stars off to the left and looked at him with a question on her face. "That's the Vena cluster," Cole said. 3 systems inside it. "We're not going that way, but you can see it from here on clear runs." Ren stared at it for another long moment. Then she looked at Cole and pointed at him with one small claw. "You live here," she said. Not a question. A conclusion she had reached on her own. "Yes," Cole said. She looked around the cockpit slowly, at the worn seat, the scratched console, the battered mug in the holder beside him, the small photograph tucked into the corner of the instrument panel that she was too polite to ask about. Then she looked back at the stars and said quietly, almost to herself, "It is not so bad." Cole looked at the cockpit the way she was looking at it, as if seeing it for the first time through someone else's eyes. "No," he said after a moment. "It's not so bad." Outside the window the stars moved slowly past, cold and endless and very beautiful, and the dust walker carried all 4 of them forward through the dark without complaint. It happened on the morning of the third day. Cole was in the cockpit running his usual checks when the proximity alarm gave a single sharp beep. He looked at the scanner and felt his stomach drop very slightly, the kind of drop that does not show on a person's face but is felt somewhere quiet and deep. A patrol cruiser had come out of a side lane and was now sitting directly across his path. It was large, gray, and had the Ketheri Dominion marking painted across its front hull in wide dark letters. The kind of ship that did not ask twice. The communication panel lit up immediately. A flat, clipped voice came through the speaker. "Cargo freighter, cut your travel speed and hold position. This is a routine cargo inspection under Dominion Outer Rim Authority. Prepare to be boarded. Non-compliance will be treated as obstruction." Cole cut his speed without hesitating. He pressed the response button and said in a calm, slightly tired voice, "Understood. Holding position. Happy to cooperate." Then he released the button, stood up immediately and moved fast. He went straight to the cargo bay corridor and knocked twice on the Bay 3 door. Their signal, which he had established quietly the day before without making a large event of it. 2 knocks meant something was wrong. 2 knocks meant move now and do not make a sound. He opened the door. All 3 sisters were already alert. Sarah was on her feet. Nora was helping Ren up. They had heard the ship slow down and they were not slow to understand what that meant. Cole did not waste time explaining. He moved to the far left wall of the cargo hold and pressed a specific panel, third from the bottom, slightly discolored compared to the ones around it. It released with a soft click and swung inward, revealing a low dark crawlspace behind the wall that ran along the interior of the ship's hull for about 4 meters. It was tight. It was not comfortable. But it was completely invisible from the outside and it did not show up on standard internal scanners because Cole had lined it with a thermal scatter layer 2 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with Dragon Sisters and everything to do with occasionally carrying goods that certain stations preferred not to officially record. He looked at Sarah and pointed inside. She looked at the crawlspace, then at Cole. Something passed across her face, not fear exactly, but the particular feeling of having no good options and needing to choose fast. She nodded, folded her wings as tight as they would go, and climbed in. Nora followed immediately. Cole looked at Ren, who was staring into the dark crawlspace with very large eyes. He crouched down to her level and said quietly, "Sarah's in there. Nora's in there. It's dark but it's safe. I'll get you out the moment they're gone." Ren looked at the crawlspace, then at Cole. Then she lifted her chin slightly, the way her eldest sister did when she was deciding to be brave, and climbed inside. Cole pressed the panel shut until it clicked. He stood up, looked at the hold, and spent 30 seconds moving 2 crates slightly to make the wall behind them look more naturally cluttered. Then he walked back to the cockpit, sat down, smoothed his jacket, and opened the communication channel again. "This is Cole Merritt, pilot of the Dustwalker, Independent Freight Carrier Registration 774-Omira. I have my cargo manifests ready whenever your team needs them. Just let me know how you'd like to proceed." There was a brief pause. Then, "Stand by for boarding." 2 Ketheri inspectors came aboard 12 minutes later. They were tall, reptilian in the way that Ketheri tended to be, with flat pale eyes and the specific kind of expression that people get when they have done a job for a long time and have stopped finding anything interesting about it. They wore gray uniforms and carried scanner units and clipboards loaded with forms. Cole met them at the boarding hatch with the single most cooperative expression he had ever worn in his life. "Welcome aboard," he said pleasantly. "Can I get either of you something warm to drink? The coffee machine is a bit loud but it works. Mostly." The taller inspector looked at him without expression. "Cargo manifest." "Right here," Cole said, producing a data tablet already loaded and ready. "Full load of agricultural supply parts, seed processors, irrigation fittings, soil testing units, headed for Farron Station on contract with Marrow Freight Solutions. That's my company, been with them 4 years now, good people, very organized. They send the paperwork through about 3 days before departure, which I personally appreciate because some companies leave it until the last minute and that always." "We will conduct the inspection ourselves," the taller inspector said, cutting him off. Of course," Cole said warmly. "Bay 1 is just through here, I'll show you. Watch the step at the corridor join, it's a little uneven, I keep meaning to fix it." He led them slowly. Very slowly. He explained each crate in Bay 1 in detail that was technically accurate and completely exhausting to listen to. He read serial numbers aloud. He described the specific agricultural application of each piece of equipment with the enthusiasm of a man who had been waiting his whole life to discuss irrigation fittings with someone. When the shorter inspector tried to move ahead to Bay 2, Cole gently redirected his attention to a secondary manifest page that required cross-referencing with the primary, which took several additional minutes. In Bay 2 he accidentally dropped his data tablet, apologized at length, and spent time searching for a specific form that turned out to be on the same page he had already shown them, just further down. The taller inspector's flat pale eyes had taken on a quality that Cole recognized as the early stages of profound boredom. Good. Bored inspectors did not look carefully. Bored inspectors wanted to finish and leave. When they reached Bay 3 Cole felt the tension in his chest pull tight, but his face showed nothing. He opened the door, gestured broadly at the crates, and immediately started talking about the weight distribution system he used for long outer rim runs and why it was actually more efficient than the standard method recommended by most freight companies, in his personal experience having tried both. The shorter inspector ran his scanner along the walls in a standard sweep. Cole watched the scanner from the corner of his eye without turning his head. The thermal scatter layer behind the left wall did its job. The reading came back flat and empty. The inspector moved on. Cole kept talking. 15 minutes later both inspectors were back at the boarding hatch. The taller one stamped the manifest clearance without looking at Cole, handed back the tablet and said, "You're cleared. Resume course." "Thank you so much," Cole said. "Safe travels out there. It gets lonely on these long runs. I appreciate the company honestly, even if it's just for a short." The hatch closed. Cole stood at the hatch for a moment. Then he let out a long, slow breath through his nose, rolled his shoulders once and walked back to Bay 3. He pressed the specific panel. It swung open. Sarah came out first, unfolding herself from the tight space with careful, quiet movements. Then Nora, then Ren, who emerged blinking and immediately looked at Cole with an expression that suggested she had approximately 40 questions. Cole looked at all three of them. "Everyone all right?" Nora nodded. Ren nodded very seriously. Sarah straightened up, smoothed her wings behind her, and looked at Cole for a long moment with an expression he had seen on her face before, the careful, measuring look she used when she was updating her understanding of something. Then she said quietly and plainly, "You are a very strange human." Cole considered that. "Probably," he agreed. "You talked about irrigation equipment for 20 minutes. It worked." Sarah looked at him for another moment. Then something shifted very slightly at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more careful than that. But real. "Yes," she said. "It did." Ren tugged the edge of Cole's jacket very lightly with one small claw. He looked down at her. She said with complete seriousness, "What is irrigation?" Cole looked at her solemn little face. "I'll explain later," he said and walked back to the cockpit to resume course. Behind him, for the first time since he had found them cold and starving on the floor of his cargo hold, he heard the quiet sound of Nora laughing. The distress beacon came through 4 hours after the inspectors left. It was a weak signal, broken and uneven, the kind that comes from emergency equipment that is old or damaged or both. Cole picked it up on the long-range scanner and sat forward in his seat, reading the data carefully. The signal was coming from about 2 hours off his current route. Not far. But far enough to cost him time he had already stretched thin. He pulled up the beacon identification code and ran it through his registry system. The result came back in seconds. Civilian shuttle. Small class. Registered to a family transport company that operated out of a system Cole recognized immediately, one of the systems the Kethri Dominion had moved through 8 months ago. The shuttle's last recorded status was listed as active and in service. Whatever had happened to it had happened recently and had happened fast. Cole sat with his hand on the navigation controls for a moment. Then he adjusted his heading and pushed the throttle forward. Sarah appeared at the cockpit entrance about 10 minutes later. She had developed a quiet habit of checking on Cole during long silent stretches, though she would not have described it that way. She looked at the new heading on the navigation screen and then at Cole. "We changed direction," she said. "Distress beacon," Cole said. 2 hours out. Civilian shuttle in trouble. Sarah looked at the scanner data on the secondary screen. She was quiet for a moment, reading what was there. Cole had noticed early on that she was very quick at reading data screens even in a language that was not her first. "Kethri Registry," she said. "Yes." She was quiet again. The words sat in the cockpit between them without either of them adding to it. Cole kept his eyes on the course ahead. After a moment Sarah said, "The Dominion inspected us this morning." "I know. These could be connected to them." Cole shook his head. "Civilian family transport. Running from the same system the Dominion took. They're not Dominion. They're people who lost their home the same way yours did." Sarah looked at the screen for a long moment. Her expression was complicated in a way that Cole did not try to simplify for her. She had her own history with Kethri. He understood that. He was not going to pretend otherwise. He said quietly, "You don't have to help. You can stay in the hold." Sarah said nothing for a moment. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor without answering. Cole kept flying. When the shuttle appeared on the visual screen an hour and 50 minutes later, Cole could see immediately that it was in serious trouble. The rear section of the hull had a breach, not enormous but large enough. The kind of breach that turns a slow oxygen leak into a fast one. The shuttle was drifting at low power, its engine output barely registering on his scanner. It was turning very slightly on its axis the way ships do when their stabilizers are failing. He opened a communication channel. The response was immediate and desperate. A voice, female, tired, frightened, speaking in accented common tongue, said, "Please, we have children on board, our oxygen is down to maybe 40 minutes, our engine is gone, please." "I hear you," Cole said calmly. "I'm coming alongside now. How many passengers?" A brief pause. 14. 3 of them are children. 1 elder who is not well. Understood. I'm going to bring my ship alongside your port hatch. Can anyone on your end operate a manual hatch seal? Yes. My husband. He can do it. Good. Tell him to stand by. We're going to do this carefully and it's going to be fine. He cut the channel, stood up and turned around. All 3 sisters were standing in the corridor behind him. Sarah's arms were folded. Her expression was set and unreadable. Nora was standing slightly behind her, already looking past Cole at the damaged shuttle on the screen with those sharp calculating eyes. Ren was at the back, small and serious, watching everything. Cole looked at Sarah. She said, "Tell us what to do." Cole felt something loosen very slightly in his chest. He nodded once and started talking fast. He brought the Dustwalker alongside the shuttle with slow, careful movements, closing the distance meter by meter until the 2 ships were running parallel with about 3 meters between their hulls. It was delicate work. The shuttle kept drifting slightly and Cole kept compensating, one hand always adjusting the lateral controls while he managed the approach with the other. Nora stood behind his seat and watched every input he made without speaking. He could feel her attention like something physical. After 2 minutes she quietly reached past him and made a single small adjustment to the stabilizer balance without asking. Cole checked the result and said nothing except, "Keep doing that." She did. When the ships were close enough, Cole locked his exterior boarding corridor into place, a flexible pressurized tunnel that extended from his port side hatch and connected to the shuttle's hatch with a magnetic seal. He heard the clunk of it locking home and checked the pressure reading. It was not perfect. There was a slow bleed at one side of the seal. He was already moving to the hatch corridor when Sarah was beside him. "The seal is leaking," she said. "I know. I'm going to brace the..." Sarah looked at the hatch frame, looked at the gap, and then simply placed both her hands against the side panel and held it. Her grip was steady. The pressure reading on the small display beside the hatch stabilized almost immediately. Cole looked at her. "Go," she said without looking back at him. "Get them." He opened the hatch. The shuttle passengers came through in a careful line, one by one, moving fast but not panicking. Someone on the other side was keeping them organized and calm. Cole stood at the hatch and guided each person through, steadying the elderly ones, making sure no one caught a foot on the corridor joint. The children came through in the middle of the group. 3 of them, 2 young ones who were old enough to move on their own and 1 very small one being carried by a man who was clearly their father, his face tight with controlled fear. As they came through the hatch into Cole's ship, the 2 older children stopped moving. They were staring past Cole with wide frozen eyes. Cole turned around. Ren was standing in the corridor behind him, watching the incoming passengers with serious, quiet eyes. She had come without being asked. When the 2 children stared at her, she looked back at them steadily for a moment. Then she sat down on the floor of the corridor, making herself smaller, and held out one open hand, palm up, no claws extended, the way Cole had seen her do with nothing in particular when she was just sitting and thinking. The smaller of the 2 children stared at her open hand. Then very slowly reached out and put 2 small fingers into her palm. Ren closed her hand gently and did not move. The child stood next to her and stopped being afraid. The last passenger came through, an older woman moving slowly, one hand pressed to her side. Cole caught her arm and steadied her. She looked up at him with exhausted eyes and said in a very quiet voice, "Thank you." "Keep moving," Cole said gently. "We'll get you settled." When everyone was through, Cole sealed the hatch, released the boarding corridor, and moved the Dustwalker clear of the drifting shuttle. He went back to the cockpit and checked on the shuttle's beacon one last time, tagging it with a recovery notice for the nearest salvage registry. Someone would collect it eventually. He looked at his passenger count. 14 new people in a ship built for one. He pulled up his supply inventory, his oxygen generation capacity, and his remaining route time, and began doing the quiet and unglamorous mathematics of keeping everyone alive for 3 more days. Behind him in the corridor he could hear voices, nervous and unfamiliar, the specific sound of people who have just survived something and have not yet fully understood that they are safe. He heard Nora's voice among them, calm and clear, explaining something about the ship's layout. He heard Ren's footsteps moving back toward the cargo hold, followed by the lighter footsteps of the 2 children who had apparently decided she was the most interesting thing they had ever seen. Cole looked at his calculations on the screen. They were tight. Very tight. But they worked. He set the course for the nearest neutral station, locked it in, and leaned back in his seat. Outside the window the damaged shuttle grew smaller and smaller behind them until it was just another piece of dark against the stars. He did not look back at it for long. There was too much ahead that needed his attention. The first day with 14 extra people on a ship built for one was loud in a way Cole had not experienced in a long time. Not loud with arguing or panic. Loud with the specific noise of too many people in too small a space, quiet conversations layered over each other, children shifting and settling, the sound of unfamiliar breathing filling corridors that were usually empty and silent. The Dustwalker had never carried this many people in its life, and Cole could almost feel the ship adjusting to it, the way an old structure settles when unexpected weight is placed on it. He managed the space as practically as he could. The cargo hold became the main living area. He moved crates to create clear floor space and brought out every blanket and soft layer he had on board. The corridor near the kitchen became the eating area. The cockpit remained Cole's, and Nora had taken a quiet position as his second pair of hands on ship systems without anyone formally deciding that was her role. It simply became true over the course of the first afternoon. The Kethari refugees were polite and careful and deeply exhausted. They took up as little space as possible, spoke quietly among themselves, and did not ask for more than what was offered. Cole respected that. He could see they were people who had learned recently and painfully that security was not something you could assume. The older woman Cole had helped through the hatch last, her name was Ress, seemed to be the quiet center of the refugee group. Not a leader exactly. More like the person everyone looked at when they needed to feel that things were still ordered and survivable. She had a steady quality about her that Cole recognized from certain experienced pilots he had known. The kind of calm that is not the absence of fear but the decision to function anyway. She watched the Dragon Sisters carefully during that first day. Not with hostility. With the measuring attention of someone trying to understand something they did not have a framework for yet. The tension was real. Cole did not pretend otherwise to himself. The history between dragon clans and Kethari settlements in the Outer Rim was long and not simple, and putting traumatized people from both sides into a single small ship and asking them to share blankets was not something that resolved itself automatically. Cole kept himself present and visible, moving between the groups, speaking to both equally, never treating the cargo hold as the refugee space and the cockpit as the sister's space. He kept everything shared. He kept everything normal. What he did not keep was his own meals. He did it quietly and without announcement. The supply mathematics he had run on the first day had been honest. They had enough to get everyone to the neutral station if everything was rationed carefully. Everyone got enough. But enough was not generous, and the children needed more than the strict calculation allowed for. So Cole simply did not eat his own portions. He split them between the smallest children each mealtime, adding the extra to their trays in small amounts so it did not look like a significant thing. He was not dramatic about it. He did not mention it. He ate whatever small amount of supplementary broth he kept in the cockpit cabinet and told himself it was fine, which it largely was. He was on his second day of this when Ren caught him. She had developed the habit of appearing silently at his elbow at unpredictable times. In the corridor at the cockpit door, once somehow behind him in the kitchen when he had not heard her come in at all. He had stopped being startled by it. She watched everything he did with that same serious careful attention, filing it all away in whatever detailed internal record she kept of the world around her. This time she appeared at the kitchen entrance while Cole was dividing the midday ration. She watched him separate his own portion into 3 smaller amounts and add them to the children's trays without adding anything back to replace them. She said nothing. She looked at his empty tray. She looked at him. Then she turned and left without a word. Cole thought she had simply moved on to something else. 30 minutes later Sarah appeared in the cockpit doorway. She did not say anything immediately. She came in and stood beside the co-pilot's seat and looked out at the stars for a moment, which was unusual. Sarah was not someone who stood around looking at stars. When she came to the cockpit she had something to say. Cole waited. After a long quiet moment she turned and set something down on the console beside his hand. It was her own ration pack, unopened, full. Then she sat down in the co-pilot seat and looked straight ahead at the stars again. Cole looked at the ration pack beside his hand. He looked at Sarah's profile. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were forward. She had the expression of someone who has decided on an action and does not intend to discuss it. He understood immediately that if he refused it she would be insulted in a way that went deeper than politeness. He also understood that she could not afford to skip her meals any more than he could. She was still recovering. Her body still needed the food. He picked up the ration pack. He opened it, split the contents exactly in half, put half back in the pack and set it back in front of her. Sarah looked at the half-empty pack beside her hand. Then at Cole. Cole was already looking back at the navigation screen. "Eat," he said simply. Pause. Then he heard the small sound of the pack being picked up. They sat together in the cockpit in complete silence and ate their half portions and watched the stars move past, and it was one of the quietest and most companionable meals Cole could remember having in a long time. Nora solved problems. That was how she spent those 3 days, moving through the ship's systems with a focused energy that Cole found remarkable, finding small efficiencies in the oxygen recyclers, adjusting the heating distribution so that the cargo hold stayed warmer without drawing more power, identifying a secondary water line that added to their supply by a small but meaningful amount. She did not ask permission. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. Cole had the distinct feeling that she was also quietly memorizing every system on the ship as she went, the way someone reads a very interesting book as fast as they can before it has to be returned. On the second evening something happened in the cargo hold that Cole did not witness but heard about from Ress later. Sarah had been sitting alone near the back of the hold, separate from both groups in the way she often positioned herself, present but apart. Ress had sat down nearby, not close, not far. They had not spoken at first. Just two women sitting in the same space, both carrying the specific weight of people who have lost something large and are still deciding how to carry it going forward. Ress had spoken first. She said she knew what the Dominion had done to dragon clans in the outer sectors. She said she was sorry for it, not because she had caused it, but because she had come from the same kind of people and that felt like something that needed to be said. Sarah had been quiet for a long time after that. Then she said that the Dominion did not represent every Ketheri any more than a storm represents every cloud. It was a careful thing to say. A generous thing from someone who had reasons not to be generous. They did not become friends in that conversation. But something shifted. Cole could see it the next morning in the way the hold felt, not warm exactly but less cold. Ren did the rest. Nobody asked her to. She simply began, on the morning of the second day, moving around the cargo hold and sitting beside the children one at a time. She did not perform for them or entertain them. She simply sat near them. Sometimes she showed them small things, the way light moved through the ship's porthole at different hours, a smooth interesting bolt she had found near the recycler that she had been carrying in her hand. Sometimes she said nothing at all and just stayed close until the child near her stopped holding their body tight with stress and began to breathe more easily. By the third day all three of the refugee children followed her everywhere she went, and Ren moved through the ship with a small quiet group trailing behind her like she had been doing it her whole life. Cole watched this from the cockpit doorway one afternoon without being seen. He thought about the cold cargo hold where he had found her 11 days ago, barely breathing, pressed against her sisters for warmth. He turned back to his controls and checked their arrival time for the neutral station. Less than 18 hours now. He allowed himself, quietly and privately, to feel relieved. They were 14 hours from the neutral station when the warship appeared. It came out of a deep lane corridor off the port side, large, dark, and moving with the specific kind of unhurried confidence that belongs to ships that do not need to rush because nothing they encounter can outrun them anyway. It was a Ketheri Dominion vessel. Not a patrol cruiser like the one that had stopped them 3 days ago. This was something heavier. A hunter class. Built not for inspections but for enforcement. Cole saw it on the scanner and felt the cold settle into his chest. The communication panel opened without him touching it. The voice that came through was flat and authoritative and completely without warmth. Cargo freighter Dustwalker. You are carrying Ketheri civilian fugitives who are wanted for processing under Dominion Resettlement Authority. You will cut your engines, hold position and prepare for immediate boarding. Surrender the fugitives and you will be released without penalty. Resistance will be treated as a hostile act. Cole did not respond immediately. He looked at the warship's profile on his scanner. It was 3 times the size of his ship. Its weapon systems were already showing as active on the reading. The distance between them was closing steadily because the warship was moving toward him at a pace that made it clear holding position was not really a choice he was being offered. He heard movement behind him in the corridor. He turned around. All three sisters were standing there. Sarah at the front, Nora just behind her left shoulder, Ren behind them both. They were not panicked. They were not uncertain. They had the still, focused quality of people who had already made a decision before they walked into the room. Cole opened his mouth. Sarah spoke first. "How long can you keep them talking?" she said. It was not quite a question. Cole looked at her. "Sarah? How long?" He closed his mouth for a moment. Then he said, 5 minutes? Maybe a little more if I use the paperwork approach." Sarah nodded once. She looked at Nora. Something passed between them without words. The specific silent language of sisters who have spent enough time surviving together that full sentences are no longer always necessary. Nora nodded back. Then Sarah looked at Ren. Ren was already looking at Sarah with an expression that was calm and serious and much older than it should have been on such a small face. She nodded before Sarah could say anything. Sarah turned back to Cole. She said, "You fed us when we were strangers. You hid us when it cost you. You gave your food to children that were not yours and said nothing about it." She paused. Her voice was steady and direct, the way it always was, but underneath it was something that Cole had not heard from her before. Something full and decided and final in the best sense of that word. "This is our debt. And we pay what we owe." Cole looked at the three of them. He looked at Sarah's set jaw and Nora's calm eyes and Ren's small serious face. He thought about saying no. He thought about the arguments he could make, that they were still recovering, that they were outnumbered, that this was not their fight to begin with. He did not make those arguments. He understood, looking at them, that they were not asking. "The exterior access points are on both sides of the cargo hold," he said quietly. "The ones on the starboard side give you the best angle on their weapon arrays from what I can see on the scanner. Their engine housing runs along the lower hull. If you can get under them, it's less shielded down there." Sarah's expression shifted by a fraction. Something that recognized what he had just done, not tried to stop them but helped them go better. "Get everyone to the cockpit and the forward corridor," she said. "As far from the outer hull as you can. When we're clear, you run. You do not wait." "I'll wait long enough," Cole said. "You will run," Sarah said firmly. Then quieter, "We know this ship now. We will find our way back." Cole looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded. He turned to the communication panel and opened the channel to the warship. He put every bit of his cargo pilot performance into his voice, slightly confused, very cooperative, mildly overwhelmed by the formality of it all. "Apologies for the delay, I was just locating the correct passenger documentation because I do have some families aboard who came aboard as an emergency rescue situation and I want to make sure I have all the right forms because I understand there's a process and I don't want to do anything incorrectly. If you could just give me a moment to find the secondary manifest page." Behind him he heard the 3 sets of footsteps moving away down the corridor. Quiet. Quick. Purposeful. He kept talking. He talked about documentation. He talked about the registry codes on the refugee shuttle he had pulled the families from. He asked 3 separate clarifying questions about the correct protocol for emergency rescue passengers under Outer Rim freight law. He found a secondary form that required reading aloud to confirm its contents. He mispronounced 2 technical terms and then corrected himself at length. 4 minutes and 40 seconds after he opened the channel, he heard the sound he was waiting for, the distant double clunk of both starboard exterior access points opening and cycling. The warship commander's voice cut through his performance sharply. "What was that? What just opened on your hull?" Cole dropped the cooperative tone entirely. His voice went quiet and level. "My crew," he said. "Going to work." He cut the channel, stood up, and moved fast through the corridor, gathering the refugees from the cargo hold with quick calm instructions. "Move forward, stay low, into the front corridor and the cockpit now, quickly, keep the children close." Rest took charge of the group immediately without being asked, moving people with efficient quiet authority, her face set and focused. When everyone was as far forward as the ship allowed, Cole went back to the cockpit and looked at the scanner. What he saw on that screen he would remember for a long time afterward. 3 signals, small, fast, and completely unafraid, had come around the starboard side of his hull and were moving directly toward the warship. The warship's weapon systems were tracking them, but the 3 signals were not flying in straight lines. They moved the way things move when open space is not an obstacle to them but a home, cutting angles that no mechanical ship could match, splitting apart and rejoining, drawing fire in one direction while another moved low and fast along the warship's underside toward the engine housing. The warship fired twice. Both shots went wide. Cole watched Nora. He was certain it was Nora from the calculated precision of the movement, do something to the warship's port weapon array that caused it to go dark on his scanner. One array down. He watched Ren move faster than the other two in a way that seemed almost impossible given how small she was, drawing two of the tracking systems after her while Sarah came in from the opposite side at the unguarded lower hull. The warship shuddered on his scanner. Its engine output dropped sharply. Cole set the jump coordinates for the neutral station, locked them in and held his hand over the drive control. He waited. 30 more seconds. The warship was trying to reposition but its movements were heavy and uneven now. One engine gone. Two weapon arrays dark. 3 signals broke away from the warship and came back fast toward the Dustwalker. Cole heard the exterior access point cycle open and then shut. He hit the drive. The stars stretched and the Dustwalker jumped. The warship disappeared behind them. Cole held the drive at full burn for 60 seconds, then eased back and checked the scanner. Empty space behind them. Nothing following. He let out a breath that he felt he had been holding for approximately the last 20 minutes. He heard the cargo hold door open. Then footsteps, uneven, slower than usual. He left the cockpit and went to them. All 3 sisters were in the corridor. They were battered. Sarah had a long shallow scoring mark across her left shoulder where something hot had come too close. Nora was holding one wing at a careful angle, not damaged but strained. Ren had a bruise forming across her jaw that made Cole's chest feel tight when he saw it. But they were standing. All 3 of them, upright and present and alive. Ren looked up at Cole with her serious eyes and said, a little breathlessly, "We are back." "I see that," Cole said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. He looked at Sarah. She met his eyes steadily. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying. It was already understood between them completely. Cole helped Nora to a seat. He found the medical kit and tended to Sarah's shoulder while she sat still and did not complain once. He got Ren something to eat, which she accepted without her usual careful examination of the food first. She was too tired for her normal process. Ress appeared from the forward corridor and moved immediately to help, her hands steady and capable. The other refugees came quietly to help settle the sisters, bringing blankets and water without being asked, their earlier exhaustion replaced by something warmer and more urgent. Cole left them all together and walked back to the cockpit. He sat down. He pulled up the ship's crew manifest on the side screen, a simple internal document that almost nobody ever looked at, required by freight company registration but functionally meaningless to anyone outside the business. It read, Crew 1. Cole looked at it for a moment. Then he clicked on the field and typed. He changed it to Crew 4. He saved the file. Outside the cockpit window the neutral station was visible now, a cluster of warm lights in the dark, growing slowly larger as the Dustwalker carried them all toward it. Cole did not announce what he had done. He did not go back and tell anyone. He simply settled into his seat, wrapped both hands around his battered coffee mug, and watched the station lights grow closer through the glass. Some things did not need to be said out loud. They were already true.